Welcome, listeners of the Where Are They Now video series produced by NC Idea. In celebration of our 20th anniversary, we are sitting down with past seed grantee founders to catch up on what they're up to, their accomplishments and activities since receiving a grant. And today, I am joined by a very special person, Vikram Sethuraman, co-founder of PT Wired. The reason I feel a certain kinship here with Vikram is that he and I both kind of entered the NC Idea orbit around the same time. I started in March of 2016, and Vikram, you got a seed grant in 2017, if I'm correct.
Yep.
And well, first of all, let me welcome you to the series. And I have to be a good host and give at least a cursory introduction of PT Wired, which at the time was an app created, to help physical therapy clinics, prevent patient dropout. Like, a lot of people may or may not know that when you go into physical therapy, it's kind of a chore to keep your patients engaged and coming back. Also to help boost satisfaction and really help these clinics improve their marketing and outreach. Was that a fair summary, of at least historically?
Yeah, and a lot of that is still very true to this day as well.
Well, that's very cool. And then you achieved at, candidly, a young age, kudos to you, an exit earlier this year. I think it was March of 2025 when at least the announcement came out that PT Wired was acquired by Prompt Health.
Yeah, earlier this year. A lot of time went into it, but it all culminated in March, and that's when everything went through.
Wow, I can't even imagine being an exited entrepreneur at your age. I was still making so many mistakes with some of my first startups back in those days. But I'm not as bright as you are. So why don't we start? Like you are, if memory serves, you are a North Carolinian native, Greensboro, I think.
Yep.
And Chapel Hill, specifically Keenan-Flagler graduate. Was it with an emphasis on entrepreneurship? We should say. Would it be fair to assume that emphasis on entrepreneurship was where the kernel of having the ambition and courage to go out and start PT Wired came from?
It was actually first PT Wired that started. Basically, I had the idea my junior year, and I was a finance emphasis at the time. Um, that I was didn't know what I wanted to do, so I decided I'll go to business school because, that sounds pretty general and applicable to everything. And then I got to business school, and then I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was like, okay, I'll do finance because that's what everybody else is doing. Um, and then I ended up in an entrepreneurship class more by chance, just based on kind of what classes had availability since I was like the last. I was coming into Keenan-Flagler. I was the last to be able to pick which classes I could take. So there were fewer spots in each class left when I could enroll for my classes. And that's actually how I ended up in an entrepreneurship class where then I started PT Wired. And then once I started at the time it was just a project. Once I started that project, then I, really fell in love with entrepreneurship and decided to then switch to entrepreneurship emphasis from finance.
Oh, good for you. Now, what was the genesis, though, of the idea? So I get it, and frankly, that's how a lot of companies get started, right? It's either in undergrad or graduate school, and you have to have that project, right, for the context of the entrepreneurship class. You know, were you recovering from sports injuries? I mean, I don't want you to violate any HIPAA compliance here, but like, what was the kernel for the inspiration of what became PT Wired?
Yeah, so I played Ultimate Frisbee all throughout college on the club team at UNC, and then had just a list of injuries one after the other from playing and like, overtraining and getting injured on the field and everything. And I just ended up in physical therapy nonstop. And one of the times in physical therapy, at the time, basically everybody in physical therapy would give you the exercises you're supposed to do on a handwritten piece of paper, sometimes like a printout with images that then they just handed to you and then said, like, do these at home before I see you next time. And I went to UNC physical therapy, had my appointment for, it was a knee injury at the time. And then they gave me the piece of paper. I lost it. And I was coming from the background of the patient who's like, I want to do 100% of everything I could possibly do to get back as early as possible. So then when I lost that piece of paper, I like really felt the pain because I was relying on my memory. I knew I wasn't optimizing everything that I should be doing because of the instruction that I didn't remember. And that's when I first had the idea of like, why is this not on an app? And I could also have videos, and maybe I could message my PT. And but the pain was my personal pain of not being able to optimize my recovery as a patient at the time.
It's weird hearing you say that. I recently had to go through some physical therapy, over conditioning. I've now torn both rotator cuffs, and I'm trying to avoid surgery. But it strikes me listening to you that, and I'm working through UNC system, that they're still handing out papers with
That's not
like
great.
photos of the exercises I got to do and the bands and how I need to do that. But I didn't think anything of it. And as I was kind of like listening to you say you thought this was nuts that it wasn't an app, it reminds me, by the age gap, you're a digital native,
Mhm.
right? So that you grew up knowing the internet. I went to college before the internet was a thing, if you can believe that. And so, like, I'm looking at that going, "Yeah, okay." I didn't think anything of it. And my therapist, and he's a great guy too. He's just, I didn't think anything of it. It was like 4 pages stapled together, and like he hand wrote notes on it. And I'm like, okay, but you're right. I mean, I'd be lost without that paper. But you had it just, it was instinctual. Like, why isn't this an app? This could already be an app. So that's just, I don't know. I guess that's me talking like an old man. So so that was the genesis, which then makes all the sense in the world. But if the timeline here is correct, you, instead of like getting your degree and then, polishing your resume and, trying to get hired by some big company to give you a nice job, it seemed like you had the confidence right out of the jump to say, like, let's make this into a company.
Not quite actually. So I started my junior year, but at the time it was just a project to me. Like it was fun and it was exciting, but then at that time, at that mind with the mindset that I had back then, it was this is a project, but this is like totally not a feasible career path at all. I was down the finance track. Um, you know, did not, like I said, it wasn't like I meant to sign up for that class. I meant to do that project. It kind of just happened. And then I kept doing finance. So that summer I went to London. I did a finance internship the whole summer. I came back my senior year, and after that finance internship, that's when I started thinking about it seriously because I did not enjoy the finance internship at all. And then I, was dealing with the whole philosophical questions of, what am I going to do with my life? And like, do I really want to commit my career to something that I didn't enjoy even for the first couple months of it? And that's when I thought back to the class and the project and thinking, okay, I have one more year of school. There are other classes that are like the next phases of this. Um, and, I didn't need to take any more classes. I just like I was already underloading, to finish out my year to with the class credits that I needed. I decided, all right, I'll just take these extra classes and I'll see how it goes. So then I took some extra classes, kept going with the idea, and then there was really never one specific moment during that year where I was like, now I'm just gonna do like I'm gonna commit to this. It was kind of little by little, it seemed more and more realistic. And towards the end of the year, there was a entrepreneurship contest, some like pitch contest that Keenan Flagler did. And I went to that, pitched at that, won a little bit of money. I can't even remember how much it was, maybe like $1,000 or $500 or something like that. But then that's where I met John Austin, who was one of the judges for that pitch contest. And then he gave me his card, told me a little bit about Groundwork Labs, which was the name at the time, now NC Idea Labs. And then at the time, even then, even though we had like gotten some success, I was still thinking it was just insane to go out of the gate from college and start a business and like knowing nothing. And when I met John, what I kind of rationalized in my head is, okay, this is an 8-week commitment. It starts right after I graduate. So why don't I do this, and then after that 8 weeks, then I'll have an idea of whether this is something worth investing more time into, or then I'll go and, do finance as originally planned. Um, so yeah, and then during NC Idea Labs, I did have that moment of, okay, this is definitely something that there is something worth pursuing here. That's kind of where I had the spark.
And I think that's again where I said early in the intro here that I feel a kinship with you because of our timing coinciding. That I remember in those early days of Groundwork Labs, because of the space we had at the American Underground, we actually allowed labs companies to co-locate with us for a while. So
Yeah,
we were cohabitating, and seeing each other in the office on a regular basis back then. And then, of course, there's the whole, community and collision of network effect because, of what AU was and, and all these co-working spaces are. Um, I think you may have fell into the deep end of the pool intentionally or otherwise,
mm,
when you got through that. And John has been a Sherpa, a mentor, a steward, whatever name you want to give him for a lot of startups. And I don't know, I'm trying to suppress my paternal instinct and feel like a proud papa knowing that you won that pitch competition because, we see that with so many of our people when they win, the micro or seed grant. It's such external validation, right? Because especially as a first time entrepreneur, you have so much self-doubt.
yeah.
And even though you're putting forward a brave face and you're faking it until you make it, but when you get these little market indicators, like, okay, I just pitched against 20 other ideas, I got validated. Like I was ranked number one, right? That's that's just chicken soup for the soul, for the entrepreneurship soul, right? That really just gets you charged to go up in there. And frankly, it was one of the reasons why we had Groundwork Labs at the time, which is just our accelerator program. That was just the name we used for it back in the day. It's an NC Idea program. It's just evolved to keep branding clean. But I think that's an important thing to share for people who aren't familiar with the entrepreneurial journey. That you go through these moments, these milestones where you're like, your faith is rewarded for the effort you're putting in, right? So I guess that's how you preempted one of my usual questions, and that is like, how did you plug in with NC Idea in the ecosystem here? Um, and then I assume it was through the lab's experience that you had the confidence to say, okay, I should apply now for a little bit of money, a little bit more than what you won at the pitch competition, I suspect.
Yeah, yeah. We applied twice. The first time we were semifinalists, and then the second time we won. And definitely the first time we weren't ready for it. I think the timing was perfect when we did actually win. Um, and you know, I think I I took advantage of every single resource, network connection that NC Idea provided at the time because one thing I was not at the time was, overconfident in myself. It wasn't a sense of like, oh, I don't need anybody. It was kind of the reverse where I was like, I should surround myself with as many people who've done this before and get exposed to many insights. Not necessarily in like just doing what everybody tells me, but I was pretty self-aware of kind of the amount of experience I needed or I had, and then I needed to surround myself with. Um, and yeah, I remember when we did win that, speaking of another kind of, self, validation moment for the business. I remember when we did win the NC Idea grant, and that to me was, the biggest, like up until the point of when we actually exited, that to me was the biggest validation of kind of what we built because I remember looking at the list of all the companies who had won prior, and then I lived in Durham, so then I had seen all these offices, like big offices of these different companies who were NCIDEA like grant winners that now had grown on to do these big things in the area and like have these big teams and office spaces and all that. So just knowing we were in a list with all of those companies who had gone on to such big things, that gave me a lot of validation that we were spending our time well, and there was we had a shot on goal essentially.
Yeah, you did. And I'm going to brag on you for a second because there's nutritional value in bragging on you, and that is, I remember you, vividly during that early time. You stood out in the fact that you were so open. You did make yourself. You availed to the people in the network. I mean, it seemed like every supplemental thing, like, the lunch and learns we used to fund where, come grab pizza and here in SME. I mean, whatever it was, it seems like you were always there, like a sponge, soaking it up. And I know it's kind of second nature for you, but that's not as common as you might think, right? I think a lot of entrepreneurs, and this is not a knock on anybody else. It's just that some become very introspective, right? And then it's like, okay, now I got to turn off everything that's external, and they can be cocooned, and that helps for certain things, like in certain stages when you need to grind, or like finish your MVP or just stay focused, heads down. But long term, it's not a great strategy. Like you're gonna you never know where that benefit's coming from the person you haven't met yet, or that engagement or that kernel of knowledge that helped you get, from 0 to 60 much faster than you would have otherwise. And you did that very, very well. I watched
Yeah,
you, just work that and leverage the ecosystem.
yeah, I think that for some entrepreneurs, because there's that tipping point of like going for it and giving it a shot. And then, that's kind of a filter for a lot of entrepreneurs of getting past that. And for a lot of people, they get past that because they have such high self-confidence from the get-go. And it's not based on the results or, the validation or the traction, but more, just that's how they start. So then I think maybe for those types of people, then they may be less open to kind of some of the external input. But like I said, that's not where I was coming from at the beginning. I was very much for a long time thinking it was not realistic. But then little by little, after I saw validation from, you know, the market, the product, the prospects, that's what kind of gave me the confidence to pursue it.
Speaking of the confidence, especially earlier on, even when you avail yourself to an ecosystem like you did, that doesn't mean all the advice, all the feedback you get from a variety of sources is valid or the right thing to do. As a matter of
Right.
fact, you can get conflicting feedback. We hear that sometimes from applicants, on the seed, because we have so many core reviewers, external reviewers. And let's be honest about something. It's subjective, right? I mean, of course, we thought PT Wired and Vikram was a good bet, but it's subjective. We didn't know. You could have just as easily flamed out as you could have, made it to the exit. So my point is, it's subjective, meaning there's no definitive way to say with absolute confidence, like this one will be successful and this one won't, which means you as the founder can get frequently conflicting feedback or advice or mentoring or whatever. Did you have any moments where you were kind of like at an impasse and go, okay, I got X and I got Y. Which way do I go?
Yeah, yeah, there was one moment. So from the very beginning, I had been pretty uh I had never just done what people told me or recommended without asking questions. I had always kind of weighed different options and made decisions that way. I do remember there was one moment where I felt that there was one path that wasn't a good path, but then one of my advisors kind of really strongly recommended it, and then I ended up doing it, and it was ended up not being the right choice, and then that cost. I think that decision cost like $15,000, which was like a
A lot of
mountain
money.
of cash at the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then that was definitely a learning experience in that after that I never kind of I always would go with my gut while always surrounding myself with all the recommendations and experience and all. But that was one specific instance where my gut was telling me one thing and then I just went with what the advisor was telling me and then, that never happened again. But it was a good learning experience for sure. And it also did not change the fact that I kept seeking out that external input and advice and recommendations.
One of those moments where you get the advice that you have to really question is, for a lot of founders, is when you raise money, when you go after funding, not just the T's and C's, the terms and conditions that could come with it. And, different funding sources will have different nuance to that model, like preferred and exit priorities and things like that. But also timing, right? Like, could you avail yourself to the resources? Is this the optimal time to trade equity, for operating capital? Did you go through raises? Did you have to kind of raise your way to the point of growth so that you got to the exit?
Yeah, yeah, I did. We did one seed round and a couple convertible note rounds that converted on that seed round. Um, in total, we did not raise that much money. And we were offered some more capital than we ended up taking. Um, at the time, it was something that I kind of like, I did not need a ton of money. I was, just there's just me, no kids, no, house, no nothing like that. I can, get by on very little, living frugal in Durham. And then so it was basically a bet. It was a bet on, the team to basically say, I think we can get more sweat equity here and not raise as much now. Um, it could just as I think one thing we got pretty lucky on is, like I mentioned earlier, the product itself and the value props haven't changed that much, but the market, the industry has, in how payers and insurance companies um, look at systems like ours and now incentivize clinics to use systems like ours. That was not the case when we started 10 years ago, but then that became the case around 5, 6 years ago. And that shift in the market um, helped us a lot to be able to grow. And, it created a whole new value proposition, which was not there when I got the piece of paper at UNC Physical Therapy. And, obviously hindsight is 2020. I think if we had raised that money earlier on, we would have probably flamed out before we got to that value proposition that was a new thing to the market. So that was just kind of a lucky thing in that, like, when by not taking that money, we slowed our growth, but then that actually ended up aligning us pretty perfectly for when that change in the market happened. So obviously, at the end of the day, you never know some of these things are going to happen and you can't really plan for it. You can, control your workload, you can control your effort and your organization and things like that, but then there are always going to be some external factors. That was one thing that happened, which was pretty lucky. And that, based on how we raised money, that makes it seem like it was maybe a smarter thing to do than it was, because it wasn't a decision that was made based on that knowledge.
It's as is the case with these conversations, most of the people I have the privilege of talking to, like yourself, you're humble. So you say something like that in a pretty, casual way, but it's profound. And that's why I always like to double click on a point like that and just say, hey, what you just said is actually, you probably weren't self aware during the process, right? But the decision ultimately helped you immensely, as would be evidenced where you were at the time of exit, right? Because people need to understand when you raise equity or you raise money by selling equity, like, if you're wildly successful, that's the most expensive funding you will ever use. It's a
Yeah.
big reason why we suggest, if you can finance through debt, use debt, even if it's at what some people would consider a usurious rate. It's still going to be cheaper than giving up a percentage of your company. And so the fact that you were kind of disciplined in that, and then that, it puts you in alignment, right? What's the old adage? The harder I work, the luckier I get, right? You were lucky for that time. I watched a podcast with you and you were explaining, and again, it was a proud papa moment for me to hear you say, like, yeah, if you go into the Google App Store, the Apple App Store, you'll find hundreds of, PT applications there, of unique clinics and just, all productized individually and branded individually. But, you're the Intel inside. PT Wired is, the system, the base system that's running all those apps. And so I think it just makes the point you just made that there was this big proliferation that was happening over the last several years as, God forbid we try to improve our healthcare system and shift to things that are more outcome oriented and like pay for wellness and things like that. You call it luck that the market did that, but you were properly positioned to take advantage of that when that happened, and that's to your credit. I think that bears pointing out. So, I'm looking at you now. You're still with, if everything in the social media is correct, you're still with Prompt Health, right? This got
Yep.
announced in March. So are you running as an SBU under Prompt Health, or can you say anything about like what your relationship is at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, we're basically like we're part of Prompt Health fully, and we actually just last week got rebranded from PT Wired to Prompt Engage. So now it's kind of been like a branded house approach to um, Prompt's products, because previously we were PT Wired, a Prompt product, and now we are Prompt Engage, formerly PT Wired, along with a couple other products that Prompt had acquired in the past year and rebranded as well. So yeah, I'm still running um, Prompt Engage, formerly PT Wired, within the wider Prompt Health ecosystem. We still have our same team. The core product is basically the same. Um, now we're just part of a much bigger organization than we were prior.
That's kind of cool. It seems like Prompt, I'm putting words in their mouth, so you should correct me if I'm taking liberties here, but that they respect not just the team you've built, but the culture, right? 'Cause a lot of acquisitions, and I've been through some. I was part of a massive roll up, was 160 million in venture capital, and they acquired like 12 practices nationally, and then just try to squish everybody together. And it was culturally, it couldn't have been done worse than they did. Is it fair to say they like everything about the way, of what you built there, and they just want to keep that intact and just say, you're part of our family now, but like, we don't want to mess with success.
Yeah, definitely. And we had been partnered with Prompt for 4 full years prior to the acquisition. And Prompt was actually founded basically the same time that PT Wired was founded. It's a pretty newer company to the physical therapy health tech space. And what was cool is that when we first partnered, we were both very, very small with like these big goals. They handled one part of the PT tech stack, we handled another. There was no competitive aspect to it. It was all, just a collaborative, relationship. And when we partnered, we both kind of grew together for several years, and we would see each other at the founders of Prompt and the initial, the core team. We would see each other at conferences and spend a lot of time together. And I would go up to New Jersey a lot, which is where they're headquartered. And you know, always it was so clear that culturally we were very, very much aligned. Um, and that was one thing. So when we were acquired, I was not ever concerned about that, because I already knew the Prompt culture in and out from having been around it and working with them for so long, that I knew that wasn't going to be a problem post acquisition.
Yeah, that does not suck, as the kids would say. Now, again, I'm not asking you to reveal anything that might be in the boilerplate of the T's and C's, the acquisition, but like, is this going to be your next reality for the foreseeable future? Or typically there's like an earn out provision, it's 1, 2 years, and then the founders get to go on to their next grand adventure. Can you share anything about that, or do you want to be a politician?
No, I'm definitely in it with Prompt right now, and the part of the reason also that we made the decision to sell was because I kind of hit a point with PT Wired where I felt like I was not, definitely in the early days, the groundwork lab days, and like when I was in the Keenan Flagler class in the first couple of years, you're just learning so much all the time. And
Yeah, fire hose.
um, yeah, it's a fire hose and it's great. And like I knew I learned how much you can learn from those years. And in the past 3, 4 years before the acquisition, we were kind of in a growth phase where things were going great. Like we were growing, everything was working and people were happy and we were making money and I was getting finally like a good market salary and everything. But then I was not learning like from a fire hose. And one of the cool things about the prospect of selling to Prompt was, Prompt is, 300, 400 person company now, and there's a whole different you know, set of responsibilities, of organization, of all these things. And I knew that I would get back to that fire hose, at least for a while, because it's such a different experience. And I had kind of, I wouldn't say plateaued in my learning, but it had slowed way down. So yeah, that's one thing that has been the case. And so far, it's been, like I said, since March, since I've been with Prompt, and that's definitely been the case that I've been learning a lot. And it's also very nice to, you know, be with a much bigger team and a much bigger backing, and not have to handle so many things of the process after 10 years of doing you know doing the marketing, doing the finance, doing the legal, doing all these different things in addition to the product and the sales and the management and all that. So that's another nice thing. So yeah, I'm in it with Prompt for
I
sure.
mean, that's completely understandable, right? Like you are chief cook and bottle washer, when you're the founder of the startup out of necessity. And yeah, you earned it, right? You earned that point where you can now, take a breath and do more of the stuff that you like and that you're, most optimized for, and less of the stuff that you don't necessarily care for, but you had to out of necessity do. And for me and all my past startups, that was always my first or second hire, was always the CFO, because I just hated the minutia of tracking the dollars and the invoices. I know, obviously, I understand how important that is, and I can do that work, but I would rather have somebody else counting the nickels and pennies and just telling me, okay, are we profitable or not, and then go focus on generating revenue. That's yeah, I get that. So, I like to kind of wrap up these conversations because, you're such a sage now. And by the way, I asked that prompt question selfishly because as an exited, entrepreneur, especially a young one with, many more decades, hopefully in this ecosystem, you know, we like to see you're going to do it again, right? More than likely.
Yeah.
And we're blessed in this area to have so many serial exited founders do that. So what comes with that is advising those that follow you. So I always like to wrap these conversations up by asking, based upon what you've went through, what advice would you be sharing with other founders? That person that just won their business plan competition as a senior at Flagler, or that other blue school or the red school or any other school for that matter. Like, what advice would you give them with the perspective now of what you experienced in the last 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to kind of people who are built like me in that position, because as we talked about earlier, there's different people who are in that position, and with different personalities and mindsets. But I think for those who are kind of self-doubting or unsure, um, the advice I would always give is to proceed, and proceed with 100%, and then versus kind of just shutting down the idea of it because it doesn't seem realistic or something like that. It should be based on what the market is telling you and what the customers are telling you versus what you're telling yourself about your abilities and whatnot. Is That's the biggest thing I learned from back then in terms of making the decision to go for it. Because for me, like I said, it wasn't a concrete it wasn't my goal or dream to be an entrepreneur for years. It kind of was a pipe dream that then ended up, becoming a reality slowly. And then I would definitely 100% say surround yourself at that early stage with as many people and resources and, um, you know, networks that you can, which can assist you, because you don't know everything. And for me, I used everything I could from NC Idea. I was constantly reading books, entrepreneurship books, and asking people for recommendations. I built like a network of other entrepreneurs in the area who were like me, first-time founders, and we would bounce ideas off of each other. So I, don't go lone wolf. And the way that I actually justified it to myself all the way back then was by saying, even if this fails, I'll have learned so much from these couple months that that will be my exit. Like I'm guaranteed an exit, whether it's an acquisition, which, we luckily ended up actually getting, but even if that didn't happen, I was going to have an exit in the sense of getting the return on investment of my time by just learning so much from that the fire hose. Like you don't get the fire hose if you go work a 9 to 5. It's just not going to happen. So that was, if anybody is struggling with the self-doubt or the belief or anything like that related to whether they can pull it off, that's what I always tell people is, reframe what you define as pulling it off. Because if you view all that learning and experience that you will get as a return on your investment as well, then that makes the decision a whole lot easier. And it makes much more sense that way.
And once again, sharing a wonderful pearl of wisdom there. I think I'm going to quote you at it, I'm sure, going forward. Not that I'll give you credit for it, but don't go by, go by what the market and your customers are telling you, not by what you're telling yourself. That is profound. I can say that as somebody that battled self-doubt, in my first several startups. It isn't until you do it multiple times that you start going a little lighter on yourself and then just saying, listen, I'm just going to listen to and believe the market, right? It's also a big reason why we focus so much on customer discovery. But Vikram, congratulations, man. I'm so happy for you. It's wonderful to see what you've done. And I have no doubt you're going to continue to be, you're going from like taking advantage of the hub and spoke model of the ecosystem to you're going to be a hub. I mean, you already are, and that'll just grow with your success. And it's that wonderful group effect, of this thing of ours, as we like to refer to it. And I'm going to be very excited for the time I have left, at NCIDEA to see what comes next for you. So thank you so much. Congratulations on that. And I really appreciate you taking some time to share your knowledge today on our little video series here.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you for everything you guys did in the journey. I definitely would say we wouldn't have pulled it off if not for NCIDEA. So grateful for you, grateful for everybody else at NCIDEA.
I appreciate you saying that.